When I started my Reddit account, I had no intention of posting on my own behalf. I would be the voice of the desperate, who would otherwise be voiceless out of fear of the things that hunted them. I've told you about people that have encountered gods or monsters, of people that fought or created demons, and even regaled you with the many mistakes of a person that has lived 139 years but was currently trapped in a 12-year-old's body. However, this happened to me, and I am posting for myself. I'm the person that runs this account. It's a proxy. I post things for people who want complete anonymity. Sometimes they contact me through one of the secure channels I've set up. Mostly, I find them when they are at their most desperate for someone to know what has happened. It is a natural human instinct, I think. We desire to be remembered. We seek out others of our own kind to tell them our experiences. It is confirmation that we exist, that we matter. Perhaps this is why I am telling my own story. I contact my clients and we make a deal. I secure their device, be it phone or otherwise, and they send me the gist of what has happened to them. I learn the details through my own methods. I learn who they are, were, and I write. It is better this way. I can leave out incriminating details, depending on how much anonymity the person needs. You would be surprised how many people don't understand how dangerous a few scraps of information can be. You likely wouldn't be surprised by how many people struggle to tell their experiences coherently. That too, I can correct. It is a learned skill, after all, best honed through practice. I want to be clear though. I do not embellish. Their story is their story, and I do not alter it more than necessary for it to make sense. Comment replies are also proxied through me. These are harder to obtain, and I try to gather them in batch, assuming the client wants to, or is capable of, replying at all. I'm their first layer of defense against anyone, or anything, that might come after them, and I've spent considerable time and effort ensuring that this layer does not fail. I protect the people that come to me, and more practically, I have to protect myself. There is quite a bit of danger involved. There are many entities that would prefer these stories never be told, and if they cannot silence the source, they come for the proxy instead. Fortunately, I have both wealth and power at my disposal. My fortune is inherited. It is enough that, with careful management, I do not have to work. My siblings were careless, and I think I would have turned out like them, were I not covetous in less material ways. We no longer speak to one another. I at least keep in contact with my family's various social connections, the ones that I can mobilize as another sort of defense on my behalf. I attend the galas and receptions, and while I am not exactly a sociable person, there is a sharp edge to me, a keenness of my personality that people find unsettling. They at least recognize that I can be useful and dangerous, and it would be to their benefit to stay in my good graces. Even in such civil company, we can pick out our fellow predators. These are the weapons I deploy against our government. There are a couple of posts they want removed, and they bring me in periodically for futile attempts to coerce me to take them down. This is easy enough to counter. I have not yet told a story that couldn't be denied, both by them as to its truthfulness, and by myself as to my own belief of its veracity. I deal with madmen, I once told them, sitting on one end of a steel table in a featureless room. There were more people watching me from the other side of a mirror. I knew they were there. I knew who they were. I like to think it helps them to have their story told. I don't believe what they're telling me is true. They know I'm lying, but how can they prove it? And they have to let me go, for there is nothing they can ultimately accuse me of. Still, they persist, holding me for hours and sometimes days. They yell. They make me as uncomfortable as they can without leaving behind evidence that I could present to our legal system. It's almost a game between us. They hate my arrogance. They would see me humbled if they could. The horrors that my clients face are a different sort of threat, a more physical one. That too, I have protection against. My house is defended both by technology and occult means. I have only been sought out twice. The first time, the creature made it onto my property, but dared not venture onto the yard. I suspect it picked up on my trail when I went to the funeral of its victim. It skulked about in the woods surrounding my property until I, growing weary of its presence, went out to face it personally. It has not returned. The second time they did not cross the property line. They remained on the road, studying the wall and the gate, and all that lay around and beyond it. I came out to them, walking halfway down the drive. There was one in particular that came right up to the gate, a broad-shouldered man with cocky pants, a deliberate choice, so that I would recognize him from the details I gleaned from the narrator of their particular story. He met my gaze. I watched him smile and nod, a knowing, calculated gesture. "We'll be watching," it seemed to say. Watching and waiting. I understand what they wanted me to know. Should my protection ever fail, they will come and find me, and I will become theirs to do with as they wish. I feel cold inside, thinking of such a fate. Yet, I knew the risk when I posted the story. If you're wondering why I do this despite the danger, well, the full story is complicated, and I'm not comfortable sharing it just yet. I can tell you the reason, however. Back when it first happened, I was desperate for someone to know, but there was no one to tell. No one that would believe me. I kept it inside me. I buried it deep until it rotted, and I feel like the poison of my secret still lingers in my blood. It made me into what I am now. Perhaps if I could have told someone, it would have turned out differently. I tell myself this is just wishful thinking. I was doomed from the start. It was only a matter of time, and any help I would have found would only have delayed the inevitable. I just wish I'd had the choice. So I take these risks to give others that choice. They take it, and their relief is some kind of redemption for who I once was. Simply being heard gives them a sort of peace, even if it cannot save them from the things they face. Not all of my clients have survived. I have a scrapbook for the ones that died. I obtain copies of their missing persons reports. I go to their funeral and cut out the obituary from the local paper. This is probably unhealthy. My therapist said I needed to learn to put the problems of other people behind me, that I couldn't carry everyone's suffering on my shoulders, that we were each responsible for our own sorrows. She has a page in my book. I wonder if she would still say that I should set my guilt aside, were she here, knowing the part I played in her death. I don't see a therapist anymore. I don't see much of anyone. It's just me, isolated in my house, telling these stories. I didn't intend to say anything about who I was when I started this. I like my privacy. However, I feel I must, that the circumstances demand it, that I have an obligation to warn the others. I'm not the only Proxy. The rest need to know what is coming for them. I was raided. I guess they went after me because I'm one of the small ones, and despite all my precautions, I'm still vulnerable in that regard. If they can get past my defences, then there is little I can do to harm them later, and if they were to kill me, then there would be no backlash, no outcry. I would simply vanish like so many others do every day. The social connections I've cultivated can only affect bureaucratic institutions. They can do nothing to stop a bullet once fired, and nor would they be willing to risk such a fate themselves for my sake. Vengeance requires a different sort of devotion. It requires followers, fanatics even. They disabled my physical security systems. I outsource much of that by necessity. I do not have the expertise to design and maintain my own security force, so I have hired the best in the field instead. The kind of security firm that is not available to the average person, that caters to an exclusive list of clients. My family name got me access, and my money secured their services. They're not certain where the failure was. They spent days inspecting my property now, testing the systems, and determining that there was no hardware failure or software vulnerability that was exploited. They fear that my system was disarmed from within. Someone inside their organization is a saboteur, and until they identify that individual, everyone is vulnerable. Do not rely on your security system. If they've infiltrated one, they've infiltrated others. My occult defenses are far more dangerous. I like to think that my security system is more for the protection of my would-be trespassers, so that they are stopped by a non-lethal deterrent and do not stumble into something far worse. I will not detail what they are, for that would ruin the surprise. Suffice to say, there was a reason why the first supernatural creature to hunt me down did not leave the woods and attempt to cross the yard. The intruders did not disable my wards. They burned them out. I have my suspicions as to how, but if I am correct, then they took the evidence with them. My defences are meant to hold off lone attackers, not a siege, and once they have been expended against an individual, they must be reset. If they came prepared with expendables, then they could have burned through my defences this way. That is just a theory. I did not find any bodies, and it rained before I could inspect the yard, so the blood would have been washed away. Still, it is a plausible explanation. I felt the first of the wards go off a few hours after the sun had set. It was my first indication that I was under attack. I wasn't afraid, not at first. If my wards triggered, that meant they were doing their job. I went to the window at the fore of the house and pulled back the curtain to look. And I saw them crossing the yard, dressed in black fatigues and almost impossible to discern in the moonless night. They carried assault rifles. I do have a safe room. This, however, was built by the same security firm that managed all my defences. An oversight on my part, perhaps, and I found it had already been sealed, and I couldn't get in. The company cannot easily override it once sealed. They can, however, activate it remotely in the event the occupant is physically unable to trigger the lockdown once inside. They're currently re-evaluating whether this is an acceptable trade-off. After this discovery, it was too late for me. They were breaking down the front door, and I felt those wards flare up and die, and then they were inside the house. I went to the stairs to meet them. I heard glass breaking throughout my home, upstairs, the first floor, and more wards fled and died as I canvassed all of my escape routes. They needn't have bothered. I was not going to try to run at this point. I understood the futility. They took me to the largest room in the house, an open space with glass windows covering all three walls to provide a scenic view of the surrounding woods. They shoved the furniture out of the way and threw me to the floor in the middle of the room. I knew what this meant, and for a moment I couldn't move or speak, frozen in dread of what was to come. There was one in particular that did all the questioning. He wasn't armed like the others. He had an easy confidence about him, the sort that comes with power. When he crouched by my side, it was like we were the only two people in the room, like all those men with their guns were irrelevant, and he was all that was necessary to get what they wanted. He reached out, took my glasses off my face, looked at them a moment, and then threw them across the room. "You tell stories," he said to me. His tone was casual, like we were simply meeting in a bar and having a friendly conversation. "You didn't need to come to my house. You could have just read them online," I replied, putting my hands beneath me in an attempt to rise. He put a hand onto the back of my neck, and I went still again. "You post dangerous things, people's experiences, the kind no one wants to see or acknowledge, because then none of us are safe." A pause. "We're looking for someone with a story. They haven't told it yet, but we think they plan to, and it cannot be told." "I've heard this before." I put some scorn in my voice. "You know what happens when I post? People read it. I get maybe a couple hundred upvotes, maybe only a few dozen if I'm lucky. That's not enough to matter." His hand slipped up into my hair, gripping it tight and pulling my head back. "It is enough," he said, and I heard his conviction, and my mouth went dry with fear. "No one can know, and the only way to ensure that happens is to make sure the story is never told." He demanded access to my computer. He wanted to know who I was in contact with, whose stories I was currently considering, what they were about. He wanted names and locations, and when I refused, testing their conviction, he broke the bones in my left hand, one by one. I gave him what he wanted. I understand the frailties of the flesh. He wasn't going to kill me, otherwise my last protection would have intervened already, rather than remaining hidden and permitting this to happen. That meant he had the expertise to ensure himself all the time he wanted to get what they were after. I have suffered like that before, and I know I have a breaking point. They made a copy of my hard drive, which is not concerning. I don't keep identifying details in digital format, and there's little else of value on there. I don't know how long he questioned me directly, using violence when I hesitated, enough so that I couldn't keep my thoughts straight, and could only tell him the stories I was collecting, their circumstances, and did not have the presence of mind to fabricate lies or hold anything back. Whoever they were looking for is not among my clients. That is the only comfort I can take from the surrender of my client's information. I was given a burner phone with a single number in its address book. If anyone contacted me, or if I contacted them, I was to call that number and tell them what their story was. If it was the one they were interested in, they would ask for more information. Otherwise, I could keep my secrets. If I didn't, and they'd be keeping a close watch on me, they'd come back. He put a knife against my cheek, the tip resting close to my eye. And this time, he said, the damage would be a little more permanent. Then they beat me, 3 of them, until I went limp and no longer cared what became of me. My protection finally intervened at that point. I felt his presence, opened my eyes, and saw his uncle as he stood on top of me, straddling my prone body. I heard him telling the intruders in his cold, amused tone that they could go now, that I was not quite as strong as I led people to believe, and that they would accidentally kill me if they continued. Their point was made, he continued. My will was broken. He never lies. He can, but he doesn't. I hate that. They left, and my protection called my doctor. There's a specific one that I pay to show up when I request, and not to ask questions. No hospitals and no emergency rooms. That is our agreement. I am vulnerable outside of my house, and it would be a simple matter for my enemies to spirit me away from a hospital while I lay there injured and unable to fight back. In the end, he at least coerced my protection to permit a visit to a radiology lab where he knew the staff and could talk our way in, to get some imaging without an appointment and without records of me having been there. Not until the morning, however, and he started an IV, and I slipped gratefully away on the pain medication he put into my veins. I have long thought that my story was over, that the pain and the tragedy was done, and I am merely living out my epilogue. I did not expect to be posting for my own sake, but I could think of no better way to warn you all. To my fellow Proxies, forgive me. I never bothered to contact any of you before now, because we were all secluded, cautious people, and I abhor social contact more than most. But they are coming for you. Shore up your defences as much as you can. Run if you think that will keep you safe. And if you fall into that man's hands, just give him what he wants. Perhaps you think you are stronger or more clever than me, but I swear this, it will not be enough. To everyone else, if you think that this is your story and you are trying to find a way to safely post it, don't contact me. I'm compromised now and I can't help you. But keep trying to find a way. Get your story out there, because someone desperately doesn't want it seen. And I think that means that your story is an important one. But be careful. They're looking for you, and you're running out of time.